Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the community of independent thinkers. What we are witnessing today on the front pages is not a series of random geopolitical accidents. These are the terrifying cracking sounds of a collapsing world order. The elites in Washington and the mainstream media are constantly spoon-feeding you emotional narratives and manufacturing artificial moral crusades to hide a ruthless reality. They desperately want you to believe that everything remains firmly under control, that the United States is still the omnipotent global policeman capable of dictating terms to the rest of the planet. But we must strip away those flowery lies and look directly at the bloody material facts on the ground. This is not a temporary disruption in the international system. This is a strategic suicide that was programmed into our foreign policy decades ago. Look at how they attempt to distract us with highly localized tragedies. The newspapers are completely flooded with the story of a Palestinian family in the West Bank. 6 members of this family went out for a simple car ride, but only 2 made it back home alive. It is a scene of absolute and devastating destruction. A father, a mother, and 2 young children were terminated in a hail of gunfire. The surviving boys recount seeing laser pointers shining on their family from every direction in the darkness before the deafening fusillade began. The Israeli military and police, on the other hand, issued a joint statement claiming they sensed immediate danger when a vehicle accelerated toward them, and they responded by shooting. These are 2 completely contradictory accounts of a bloodbath. Those children simply wanted to go out to buy new clothes and fried donut holes to celebrate the end of the fasting month of Ramadan. Instead, the surviving boys ended up finding the corpses of their parents inside a shattered vehicle. You might feel profound moral outrage reading about this. You might weep for those innocent lives, for a 35-year-old mother who was shot multiple times in her head and chest, or a 5-year-old boy who was shot several times in the face. But that moral outrage is exactly the trap the liberal elites want you to step into. They want your eyes glued to the endless bloody friction in the West Bank so that you fail to realize that the entire global power structure of the United States is currently being incinerated in the Persian Gulf. The ruthless reality they do not want you to comprehend is that we are sinking up to our necks into a full-scale war with Iran, and the jugular vein of the global economy is being violently squeezed. Iran has effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz to America and its allies. Let me quantify this destruction for you so you understand the gravity of the mechanism at play. Approximately 1/5 of the entire world's oil supply is physically forced to pass through this narrow geographic bottleneck. When a hostile power slams that door shut, they do not merely create a temporary logistical inconvenience for shipping companies. They ignite a massive inflation bomb with the kinetic power to level every Western economy. International oil prices have surged past $106 a barrel, rising more than 3% in early trading alone. The United States Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, has desperately admitted on television that there are absolutely no guarantees that energy prices will fall in the coming weeks. Our domestic economy is bleeding to death. In an anarchic world, national survival does not come from high-minded speeches about human rights or a rules-based order. Power comes directly from industrial capacity and raw material resources. If you cut off the supply of cheap energy, the sophisticated industrial machine of the West is rapidly reduced to rusting scrap metal. And how does Washington react to this structural catastrophe? With a level of hubris and naivete that is simply staggering to observe, the president is throwing a geopolitical tantrum, publicly demanding that other nations, specifically NATO allies, send their warships to break the de facto Iranian blockade of the economically vital strait. He explicitly threatened that if there is a negative response, it will be very bad for the future of the NATO alliance. This panic completely exposes the alliance delusion that neoconservatives and liberal hawks have nurtured for the past 30 years. Washington genuinely believes it can order the rest of the world to sacrifice their treasure and their blood to clean up the catastrophic wreckage created by our own disastrous foreign policy choices. But material reality is always ruthless. Foreign governments have responded to the idea of sending their naval vessels into the strait with extreme caution if they respond at all. They have zero desire to throw their own soldiers into a Middle Eastern meat grinder just to save face for an overextended American empire. The political leaders in Europe are bound by their own domestic survival calculus. They cannot sell a foreign war over oil transit to populations already suffering from inflation and economic stagnation. However, the most brutal and frankly ludicrous aspect of this entire debacle is our reaction to China. The president suggested in an interview that China should also send warships to help secure the Gulf. He even went so far as to threaten to postpone his scheduled summit in Beijing with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping if China did not comply with this demand. Think about the sheer strategic insanity of that decision. We are actively begging our sole peer competitor, a nation of over 1 billion people with massive wealth and an industrial base designed to dismantle our hegemonic position, to come and act as a maritime security guard for our interests. Why on earth would Beijing deploy its navy to act as mercenaries for Washington? Iran is playing a remarkably smart, calculated game. They are allowing ships carrying oil to China to cross the strait completely unharmed, while launching projectiles to set other oil tankers on fire. The leaders in Beijing have absolutely little incentive to send in their naval power. They are sitting back, crossing their arms, and watching the United States willingly drain its own military capability and financial reserves in endless, pointless conflicts in the Middle East. Every drone incident at the Dubai airport, every missile attack on the Baghdad International Airport, and every drone intercepted over Saudi Arabia is an invaluable strategic gift handed directly to Beijing. The Chinese are learning a profound lesson from observing our blunders. They see an America bogged down in secondary theaters, completely incapable of pivoting its massive resources to contain the real existential threat rising in East Asia. You must understand that this current disaster is not a sudden accident. This is the inevitable result of a disastrous path dependence spanning 3 decades. Ever since the Soviet Union collapsed, the foreign policy establishment has clung to the dangerous delusion that they can use military force to reshape the entire world in their own liberal image. Look at the historical record because the mechanism never changes. We intervened in Iraq with naive beliefs about democratization and regime change. We utterly destroyed the Iraqi state. We intervened in Libya to protect civilians. We turned a functioning country into an anarchic wasteland and an open-air slave market. We pumped weapons and resources into Syria. We threw that entire nation into a sea of fire. Everywhere the American military machine travels under the banner of human rights, the only things left behind are dysfunctional rump states and a massive trail of blood. The architects of these policies have always believed American military power is infinite and carries no strategic blowback. Washington should have learned the most basic rule of great power politics decades ago. You must relentlessly cut your strategic commitments in non-core areas of the globe to focus absolutely all your strength on containing the massive industrial behemoth rising in your primary theater. But politicians, handcuffed by domestic pressure and a blind, arrogant nationalism, have chosen to keep ramming their heads into a brick wall. Furthermore, we must apply cold strategic empathy to understand the adversary's calculus. The Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, stated bluntly on television that his country is ready to defend itself for as long as it takes. He explicitly denied the American claim that Iran wanted to make a deal, stating that they have never asked for a ceasefire and have never even asked for negotiation. Iran is not acting out of irrational malice or some cartoonish evil. They are operating purely on existential security fears. They are acting exactly like an animal backed into a corner by a superior, conventional force. When a nation perceives an existential threat from a hostile alliance, it will use every asymmetric tool at its disposal to make the aggressor bleed. They cannot match the United States ship for ship or plane for plane, so they weaponize geography. They use cheap drones, missile barrages, and proxy militias to impose unacceptable costs on our logistics network. This is the brutal logic of attrition warfare applied to global trade. What we are witnessing today is only the tip of the iceberg. The logical connection between Western hubris and ruthless material reality leads down only one path. There is no diplomatic miracle waiting in the wings to save us. Threatening our NATO allies with empty rhetoric or begging a peer competitor like China to intervene will only further expose our severe structural weakness to the rest of the world. In the short term, energy inflation will continue to claw at the domestic economies of the West, destroying the middle class and turning the grandiose promises of politicians into bitter, cruel jokes. Allies will inevitably realize that the American security umbrella is heavily torn, and they will begin seeking alternative survival strategies and regional accommodations rather than taking suicidal orders from Washington. In the long run, the future is remarkably bleak. Continuing to pour our precious blood and our finite dollars into the sands of the Middle East is a strategic death warrant, signed by the sheer ignorance of our own policymakers. We are actively amputating our own limbs right on the eve of a true existential clash in the Western Pacific. The evaporation of American global power is not an accident of history. It is the fitting, inevitable punishment for an empire that blindly ignored the iron laws of the balance of power. Do not let the establishment continue to lead you by the nose with flowery lies about democracy and values. Do not let them turn your wallets, your standard of living, and your national security into sacrificial lambs for their geopolitical delusions. Join our community, subscribe to the channel, and let us expose these ruthless truths together. We need collective sanity and cold realism to face the coming decade of storms. Stay safe, stay awake, and never stop questioning. The truth is out there. I will see you next time.